Hey, good morning, Sustainers. I wanted to do this quick video recap of my experience at Sustain OSS yesterday in London, while things are still fresh in my mind. First, that was an amazing event. Already really loved it. To give some context, it was started by my co-founder, Pia Mancini, Open Collective, and Justin Dorfman from the Sticker Mule. And now it's a group of people that come together as a collective to organize this conference. It was organized last year in San Francisco at GitHub, and this year it was yesterday in London. And the first thing that really blows my mind in this type of event is the fact that it's very different, it's very participative. There is no PowerPoint, and no voice is more important than any other one. Like, all the people who are there were about like 90 people, all like very super interesting. They are either coming from the developer side, maintainers of open source projects, or people who work at companies who want to support open source, people who work in foundations. And so everyone is really genuinely interested in kind of the thing that we all care about, the sustainability of open source. And so it really creates this great environment where we can all learn from each other, and that's very inspiring. And a key component of that is actually the moderation, the facilitation. And for that, Gunnar has been, as always, like very good. He knows his topic for sure, but he's also like really good, a good mix, a good balance of entertainment, but also like keeping everything on schedule, organizing, setting up the scene so that everyone can really participate with a lot of different moderators. Sometimes we're just picked on the spot. And one thing that actually this shows me is that first, with the power of collective intelligence and how important it is to teach those principles to our kids in schools. Like, we don't learn that. We still learn, like very top down, like the teacher talks, and then we just need to listen. And I really hope this is something that we're gonna teach our children more and more. And one of the key things, for example, to really keep those conversations really useful is to make sure that there is a good balance first. And that's something also very nice at Sustain OSS Summit is this is the only maybe tech conference I've seen with so many women, and this is great. And there is also like a lot of diversity, people from different colors and different origin. Like there was even someone coming from Nigeria. This is great, because for collective intelligence to really shine, it's really important to have people coming from different angles, different perspectives. And the other important ingredient is to make sure that no voice is more important than any other one, that everyone get the opportunity to talk. And so that's also something that we need to kind of relearn in a way, is being able to listen is equally important. So anyway, that was great, but kind of a few of the notes that I took that I really think were interesting. It's kind of tidbits, not in no particular order. So one thing I've heard is people feel underappreciated or under-recognized for their work a lot of times. And the open source community is really helping with that. Because by doing open source, you do things that other people need, find it useful. And so I think it's interesting, and the reason why more and more people within companies should also contribute to open source. If nothing else but their mental health. A company has to focus on one thing. That's kind of a big advice we give to startups. But a collective can focus on a multitude of things. And so here, the collective of organizing Sustain, like, we basically split in different groups talking about different topics, because sustainability covers a lot of ground. It's not only about financial sustainability, but also making sure that people, maintainers, don't burn out. It's about also making sure that everything is inclusive, that everything we do, that everybody feels welcome to join and contribute. So it's a lot of different topics, subtopics, and as a collective, as a group of people, we can cover a lot of those things. We were talking about um, one thing that I've heard I found interesting, we talk a lot about how can we include more people in the open source community, because right now it's been mostly driven by developers, but an open source project really needs way much more than code. We also need tech writers, people who are gonna write documentation, designer, not only to have big, great logos, but also like to improve the user experience. People who are gonna take care of support, people who are gonna talk at conferences, to explain, to teach, right? So we really need to create an environment where a lot of different people with a lot of different skills can also join an open source project to contribute. And for that, we should stop referring to those people as non-developers, because it's kind of referring to them as this negative space. But instead, we should call them by their names. So designers, tech writers, product managers as well, fundraisers. It's a job doing fundraising, and we should also recognize those people. To manage all of those people, like right now we've been primarily using GitHub, and which is a fantastic platform for developers. But as we need to include other type of profiles and skills, like we need to kind of rethink all of those tools that we've built over time for companies, but for collectives. Like for example, Expensify to submit expenses, Zendesk to take care of triaging the support request, QuickBook for the accounting. There are many of those tools that have been primarily made for Slack, made for enterprise, but we need to rethink those with transparency by design, to make sure that this can fulfill the needs of all of those collectives. What else? So we talked also like about how can we help those collectives get more money, and there was Eric Berry from a Code Fund that was there, and we kind of talk about the idea of having a ethical label for companies that would use primarily ethical ads and refuse to use those ads that track us. And I think that was a really good idea, because basically the point was that it was saying that through what it's doing, its problem is that it cannot really compete with Facebook and the likes, because they can track people, right? And so the click-through rate is better. And so I think it's important here is not to enter that game, because we cannot win that game. But instead we need to bring people to a different playing field, which is the ethical playing field. And so say like, look, yes, but this is about like showing your values to your community, that you are respecting your users. And I think that would be something interesting. We also talk about other ways, something related to that, as we talk about other ways that a community, an open source community, can also generate revenue for the community. And then we thought that actually the people who are making money a lot of them are actually consultant, freelancers that basically for their job they use open source and then they bill their clients. And so we thought that maybe what we could do is to the collective to basically advertise, recommend developers that are available for hire as freelancers, and under the condition that those developers will give back to the community some portion of it. And like the ethical ad, this would be kind of the ethical freelancer, the ethical consultant developers that as a company you can hire. And like the ethical ad, it's gonna be more expensive, but the data is really about financing the community, making sure that we build sustainable communities. And in many ways, a bit like all of those restaurants now that say like proudly that here we only source sustainable ingredients, organic, locally produced, and all of that. And it's more expensive, but people are definitely like positively reacting to that. And so it would be great to have kind of an ethical label for ethical ads, but also for hiring people who will give back to the community, that without which they wouldn't be able to do what they do. Also, I've heard that someone was going to work on an index for open source friendly companies. I think this is a great idea, because I've heard also many times that people would definitely rather work for companies that support open source communities, which makes sense. Also heard that we need to invite maybe one type of people that was missing in the conference yesterday were kind of more service providers, consultant agencies that are actually the ones really on the front line between open source communities and companies, because they kind of integrate, right? It's a bit like the people who use Drupal, for example, Drupal integrators and so on. I think that's a good idea to think for next time. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. Oh no, one other thing that I thought interesting too. I was part of a small group with talking about how companies can support open source. One other thing that we came up with, and that's something that I would love to follow up on, is this idea of developing an open standard to apply for funding. Because the problem is there are a lot of companies and foundations that actually do have budget to support open source communities, but they each have a different process. And so when you do an open source project, like, you don't have the time to basically go apply to every single one of them, right? I mean, you want to focus your time on the code. So if you're interested in that, please ping me, because we'd love to follow up on that. Like, how can we develop an open standard in a way? And you know, we can start small with just a few companies, but okay, like, this is only one form that you need to fill to, and your request is going to be dispatched to a bunch of different potential funders. And I think that would be tremendously useful. The other thing I learned too from companies is, so they want to support open source. Many of them do, but there is a couple of, you know, we need to make it easy for them. So one of the obvious things that, and that's what we started Open Collective, is that, well, first they need an invoice, right? And so that's what we are solving. But also, like, I've heard that it's easier for them to give $10,000 than $500. So that's something good to know. And for less than $500, actually, turns out that engineers working at those companies, they can easily expense like in-kind donations, right? So for example, if you want to give, I don't know, pay for a Roku bill, or, you know, any other service that would be useful to the community, that's something that that you can easily do. So it's good to know. And then we're also talking about creating maybe like a travel fund to help people, give scholarship to help people go to different conferences and so on. So those are things that also might be easier to do for companies. One of them was also talking about the idea of they would love, for example, to give money to an open source project to increase the pace of pull requests being merged, right? And so what was interesting to me was that they actually didn't like the idea of giving money to merge a specific pull request, and because otherwise it would be really kind of corrupting in a way the open source project. And I kind of really appreciate that, to realize that actually people are really mindful within companies to, while they want to support those communities, they also don't want to steal them too much. They want to be mindful about it. And so one idea that kind of we came up with was the idea of maybe, hey, what about doing like kind of, I mean, two things. First, I think it's important to report on the, you know, when you raise money, and kind of showing month after month, like how much progress you make in terms of issues being resolved and pull requests being merged. I think that's something that they also love to see, so that they can see the impact. Like if they start sponsoring your open source project, they can see that, oh, indeed, since we started sponsoring this, they've increased the pace, and that's something important to know, metrics. But also, the other idea that we came up with was the idea of maybe we can ask money for merging a pull request, but you need to, with a paid forward kind of scheme, where you pay to merge this pull request and another pull request will also be merged, and that's up to the maintainers and the community to decide, like to pick whatever, but at least so that, you know, it's kind of a balance between to make sure that companies are not the only one who gonna steer the evolution of all of those open source projects. So, that's it. I hope I wasn't too long. I was really inspired. I really one thing that is really important to me is there've been a bunch of great ideas that came out of this, and I'm sure many other people have other notes that even better than these notes that I took. And so I'm really looking forward to the report. You can already go on sustainoss.org and see the report of last year. That was also like super well done. And yeah, and to me, like, I really hope that we'll see working groups type of coming out of this, that will take some of those ideas and turn them into reality. And if any of you is jumping on any of those ideas, please let us know. The hashtag is Sustain OSS, and thank you for listening. See you on the interweb. Bye.